So thanks for coming along. What I'm going to do first of all is sort of break form a bit. I need some help. So I have this friend, Rebecca, an American lady, and over the last few months she's really got me into the habit of using the phrase guys for any collection of people. Now, I didn't want it to happen, but it did. And as a coach, I think that language is a really important tool for thinking, and it's a really important tool for change. And so I don't want to be kind of part of that, using that kind of language that some people find discriminating. And it's kind of a death by a thousand cuts. Even if you feel those are small things, they still make a difference. So the thing I need your help with is I have some feedback emitters here. So if you'd like to just pass them around a minute. And if I do fall into the guys trap, I think the people with feedback emitters will know what to do. So if you want to just grab them and pass them around, it's all right. You don't have to use it if you don't want to.
What's wrong with guns?
What's wrong with real guns? Not.
Donald Trump would insist.
I can see a bit of hefting already. It's amazing, right, how Nerf guns, as a quality product, have that mythical thing called affordance, like Apple product as well. You pick them up and you feel the quality. Anyway, we should get to the point. So, my name is John Clapham. Very pleased to be invited here, albeit at short notice. Mastering the tech here. Let's see how we go. Today I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about perpetual motion. I'm going to talk about burnout. And I'm going to talk about fish. Is that what you all expected? Right. So before I do that, let me introduce myself properly. I'm an Agile coach. So what that means to me is probably 30% having a deep understanding of Agile and learning methods and how to blend them together to suit an organization's context. And then another 70% is about coaching on a one-to-one and team basis. It's about trying to help people and organizations achieve their potential, because so often we can understand the methods quite easily, but it's the things that are going on in our heads that are kind of stopping us moving forward. And so that's what I do. Independent consultant, as I said. This is going to wind me up something chronic. And as Matt said, I'm here at quite short notice, and I was actually given this title to play with, which was Design for CD Teams. So of course the first thing I thought was, well, hang on. What is the difference? What is the difference, if there is any, about designing a team for a continuous delivery environment? I then went into a bit of a tangent about whether we should have teams in the first place, but that's quite a convenient way to think about groups of people and their capabilities. But I've kind of come to a conclusion that there are some differences. So first of all, what I'd like to do is share those with you. And then I'm going to talk a bit more about some of the things that differentiate continuous delivery teams, particularly the high-performing ones, from other teams. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is this notion of coevolution. Now, there's a really good example of this that's in films. I expect you've seen it. It's a kids' film. Shout it out if you know it. They're looking for a fish, and sorry. So it's an example of coevolution in the ocean. Two things that live together, help each other. Okay, so the obvious thing to go for was Finding Nemo, but actually, what I think it is this film. Who's seen it? Sharknado? No? So, it's going to wind me up. So here we have a good example of coevolution, right? The tornado has co-evolved in this documentary with the shark. Actually, I can't back that up, but you ought to go and see the film because it's very good. Let's get on to proper coevolution and why it's important for continuous delivery teams. So, we're very used to thinking about our team as a unit, as a thing with a fairly tight boundary in it. And methods like Scrum and so forth really encourage this. They really encourage us to tighten in on our teams first, sort out our own things before we worry about other people and other teams. Now, I think the coevolution in CD is a thing that differentiates teams. So this is an example of a type of coevolution right here. This is called mutualism, where two entities help each other. So what's going on? Am I still on the video if I'm over here so that people can still see? Great. So this is called mutualism, right? And what's happening here is both the clownfish and the anemone are basically helping to deal with each other's predators. They decrease the chance of predation by working together. The fish can swim out and scare stuff off. The anemone can protect the clownfish from other predators. And the coevolution bit comes because successive generations improve their abilities to do this and to look after each other. And the other interesting thing is that the way it works is not that the clownfish has just grown up to be really tough and not get poisoned by the anemone. It actually has a chemical signature that means the anemone doesn't even give off its poison when the clownfish is present, which saves its energy. And so mutualism then, and coevolution, you could say is a kind of dev and ops type relationship. You're looking at two entities, two teams together, improving their ability to achieve a purpose, to survive, to be fit. Now the other type of coevolution that you see is, this is called asymmetric evolution. And this is a predator-prey relationship. Now what's going on here is whelks. And what you see coming down from the whelk into the fish is what scientists call the gross footy proboscis thing. Now, what that is doing is enabling it to eat its prey. And there's a battle going on, an evolutionary battle, where both the whelk and its prey are trying to get better. One is trying to get better at finding lunch, the other one is trying to get better at not being lunch. And this is called asymmetric evolution. And this is a thing that we often see with teams. They'll grow up together, locked in. I guess you could say that some approaches to change requests are like this, where teams will receive some work, they'll find an error in it, and they'll kind of bolster their defenses. You know, I've seen these arms races over change requests before. And this is not very productive for continuous delivery, right? It's a very defensive view. What is more interesting is this final type of coevolution, and this is called symmetric. Now, in symmetric coevolution, there's an equal force exerted on all the entities that are trying to evolve to some purpose, right? And so in this case, with the kelp, which is growing something ridiculous like 60 centimeters every day, the sun over the whole ocean is causing all the kelp to come up simultaneously, okay? And this, to me, is more our view for continuous delivery teams. It's not about my one team over here and optimizing myself for one purpose. It's about the ability to grow up with all the other teams in the organization and to know when I need to help my own team and when I need to go and help other teams. And if you are of a systems thinking bent, this is the difference between over-optimizing one area, which necessarily compromises the whole system, versus understanding the whole value stream and knowing where to invest your energy. So, coevolution, as we said, first CD teams trait a strong desire to co-evolve. So, as I mentioned, the sun is a pretty obvious reason to evolve for kelp and trees and all the others. It's right up there, it's hot, you can't really avoid it. But I'd imagine for all of you, it's much less obvious what kind of things to aim for. And what they say in the lean enterprise that really stuck in my mind here is use continuous delivery to reduce the risk of releases and decrease cycle time. Now, I'm sure you've all heard that. Make it economic to work in small batches. And that's the real killer. And often it isn't economic, and that's why we need to put our focus on it. And as a comparison to the sun and our symmetric coevolution example, things like this that are heuristics that can guide teams so they can think about things and make decisions for themselves are extraordinarily useful. You know, Dave Farley's always talking about cycle time. If you can't think of a different way to encourage people, use cycle time, because it's another kind of North Star, another sun, another thing that everyone can aim for. Has anyone seen this before I kind of dig into it? This is Reinersten's notion of finding the right batch size for for anything, for units of production of code, in manufacturing of widgets. So the crucial thing here is that, in my mind, anyone on a CD team or in an organization that is striving to do continuous delivery ought to be able to make decisions about this themselves. And they ought to have the autonomy to do that. If they have to ask permission to go and make a change somewhere, particularly where it affects something downstream, you're already introducing a delay. So these kind of economics here, where you see the holding cost of deferring, so that's the cost of delay, obviously, and you're seeing the transaction costs. So right over on this side, what we have is a purely artisan approach where every single thing is made individually with a great deal of care. It's not very economical. And over here we have, widget factories and Ford car manufacturing. And of course, what people like Toyota did, who got really good at just-in-time and lean manufacturing, is they found that sweet spot of the optimal batch size. So if we're in our teams and we're thinking about what to do with our time, what to do with our team's time, we're planning an iteration, trying to work out where we should best place our efforts and use our talents, it's so important to understand these costs. But it's not just about monetary costs. There's a time cost. There's a cost of delay to market. Classic examples of things like Comic Relief. I'm not sure if you've had their talk about their systems, but they've got one night to get it right and a ridiculous transaction volume. So you think about the cost of delay for them for not having their systems up for the one night. So there's a whole load of different dimensions, and these need to be considered in addition to all the other stuff that we think about. And so I think this autonomy to make those decisions, to be able to go out and find the things that will improve the continuous delivery capability of the organization are really important. And just to kind of labor the point, I believe there's this difference between an autonomous team, where the team is isolated and has its own direction and understanding of what it needs to do, so it's largely left alone by the rest of the org but self-organizes itself, versus a team that has the autonomy to make decisions, and for instance to go over to another and individuals go over to another team and say, look, this really isn't working out for us, we're getting a load of defects in, or we're having to do a load of changes based on your changes, can we talk about it? So this is the second thing, an understanding of business imperative and the autonomy to act upon it. Now the last thing that I think is particularly different about a CD team is the number of interactions. Have you folks seen this before? This is the number of, a few notes, great, the number of communications lines that people have, number of relationships, sorry. Let me start again. Each node is a person, obviously, and the lines represent communication paths. And this is used to show how many communication paths we need to remember and how many we can hold in our brains. And the interesting thing is, as you increase the number of people in a team, so 6 is considered quite a small team, but as we move up, we can see we're suddenly having to cater for a whole load more interactions. And, the thing that makes us, a lot of us good engineers, is a certain mindset that means that we're also not that inclined to be sociable, shall we say. We're not that... Communications are okay, but they're not great, and given a choice, you probably wouldn't go do them. And so, continuous delivery, which asks us to... we've just had a bit of a feedback fail over here. I think I deserved a shooting. So, continuous delivery by its very nature, because we're going out there to try and improve the whole system and help other teams as much as our own, means that we're communicating more, right? And these interactions, the increased number of interactions, can be a strain, and we need to go and retreat sometimes. And it's a thing that's also getting worse in our general lives, because when we go to work now, we're not just interacting with our team of, the worst case here is 10 people, which means 45 different full relationships to hold in your head, 45 people to remember their names, some details, whether they're grumpy with you at the moment or not. We also have our phones with us always, trying to interact with us. We have a large social network which is slightly indistinct, trying to interact with us. So we're constantly interrupted. It's not just about the people in the room with us. And so if we've got a pizza-sized team, and Matthew and I observed the other night actually that if you want to increase your team size, you can just increase the size of pizzas. I'm not sure why that hasn't been thought of, but that seems to work pretty well. If you've got a pizza-ish sized team and you're interacting with the 10 people on it, but then you're also expected to go out and interact with a load of other teams to make things better, it just explodes. And it's a tremendous strain. So as a kind of little tangent, you can measure interactions, and they're doing this mechanically. Has anyone seen these before? These are sociometric badges. So these are invented by Alex Pentland and his MIT Media Lab. And a number of companies have commissioned them. You kind of wear them on a lanyard, and they measure things like the speed of your voice, the tone, how close you are to someone else wearing them. And then they map out the networks within an organization. Here's a couple of people showing that wearing the badges is not awkward at all. And the end result is something like this, which absolutely fascinates me. So what you have is the size of the dot is the amount of energy that someone's putting into something. That will be the speed of voice, probably how much they're dancing around, all these kind of things. The lines are the frequency of communication. And what we can see, which is pretty interesting, is we've got the green team over here are quite isolated, but they're communicating an awful lot with each other. The same for purple and red. And then we can also see things like this node here is the only direct communication between green and blue team, which seems quite precarious. And we can see that the red team has a kind of center that everyone is talking to very frequently. It'd be very interesting to know if that's someone who is in a leadership position, an influencer, or whether people don't realize whether this is actually uncovering a hidden person who is pivotal to this team. Now, if I was looking at this to find good behaviors for a CD team, I'd be quite interested in this blue bunch of people here. And the reason for that is their interactions are spread across the other teams. So that says to me they're working across the organization and lots of different people. So these badges will work outside of the org chart, tell us what's really going on, and they'll fill in that gap between reported behavior in surveys and what actually happens. And so, here's just to kind of illustrate that point more. Classic blame chart here. You can see that they've got various teams, and the chances are they're kind of isolated here and here. But you don't know for sure. So what you can do yourselves, anytime, is to draw one of these. This is called an influence map. Has anyone done this before? Have a look at it. Excuse me. Right, so the influence map is something that marketeers started off using to try and figure out how to get into businesses and make sales. It's actually really interesting from a coaching and understanding perspective. And if you're looking at how to consider an organization and how to factor it for a purpose, like continuous delivery, it's very useful. And what I would recommend is if you just take 5 minutes tomorrow, think about a thing that's going on that is of interest to you, like evolving architecture. Who is responsible for agile practices? Who do I need to talk to get the kind of work that I'm interested in? And then you can draw out an influence map that covers what is really happening. And what you're likely to see is it doesn't match up at all with the org chart. Okay, here's the second detail. So what I heard was that you can't have a London CD without a mention of Conway's Law. So you all familiar with this? No? I need to see hands. Show me hands. Right, thank you everyone. Okay, so about half. So very briefly then, as it says here, organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. The example in the paper, How Committees Invent, was that they divided up teams to make 2 different compilers, and essentially the team of 5 produced a 5-phase compiler, and the team of 3 produced a how many phase compiler? 3. So we need to consider this. The thing that I'm always banging on about, frankly, is we often think about doing things like the Spotify model and how that's going to improve organizations. Anyone doing this now? A couple of nods. Okay. Anyone considering it or had a go and then not doing it? Okay, sort of vague. Okay, that's cool. So what I see is this, Conway's law by proxy. If you go and grab the Spotify model and impose it on your organization, you're just taking someone else's communication structures, and now they don't match what's actually happening in your organization. You have no way to know that that's going to move you forward, because suddenly all the stuff that we talked about a minute ago, the org chart, which some people are going to see and use as a first guide, versus the influence map that we saw, the things that are actually happening, none of those are going to match up to the communication structure that you're trying to superimpose on the organization. So there will be a lot of resistance. And this is the kind of thing that's often spoken about when we talk about improving our release capabilities. If we nip back to interactions a minute, what we see is, well, I don't know if you detected it, it seems to be pushed back against open plan. And some of that is happening because of a recognition that we're all getting fatigued by the amount of interaction, and we don't work our best when we're expected to collaborate constantly. This is a thing that seems to be hitting Agile quite hard, and the perception that we're not all going to be slavishly talking to each other all the time, running around mobbing. We need downtime. And the physical environment is important to this. Here's a handy quadrant which sort of illustrates the times and places when you can optimize the environment. And the ideal situation is to have all of these spaces available so that people can go and find their spaces, go and find their thinking spaces. Can you see this at the back? Yeah, so basically just the main point we're making here is that open plan heads towards cross-pollination and group efficiency, whereas assigned seating and private offices will tend towards individual productivity. And then the other reason to really think about the interactions is, as I said earlier, there is definitely this coupling between comfort in social situations and intellect in some folk. And so we need to embrace, it's useful to embrace this diversity because it's good for productivity, it's good to be around these different kinds of thinking, different kinds of people. And so if we create these environments where everyone is supposed to be a change agent, everyone's supposed to be one of Gladwell's connectors, it doesn't work for everyone. We don't get the best of the talents of our organization. So, we talked about these three traits: strong desire to co-evolve, understanding of business imperative, and the autonomy to actually do something about it. When you see a problem, whether it's in your team or another one, seek it out and find a way to work on it and improve it. And now what we're going to do is step away from that and look at one of the fundamental things that underpins high performance in teams, regardless of whether they're optimized for continuous delivery or whether they are optimized for other things, product output, for instance. Because some people are already nearing the end of their continuous delivery journey. So employee engagement then, why should you worry about that? Well, first of all, I need a quick show of hands really. I need to find out who's in the room. So who feels like they're an individual contributor? So you're mostly doing their own work and chatting to their own team, but not really reaching outside of the team. Hands up if you're in that camp. Okay, great. Who feels like they are more of an influencer or a leader? Okay, interesting. A lot more hands up. And who's a psychopath? Right. Okay. Interesting. Lots of hands went up. But of course, we all know that psychopaths are notoriously good at gaming surveys and personality profiles. So it's people who kept their hands down that I'm more worried about. So for the psychopaths, there's only one thing in this talk for you. Here's why you should worry about engagement. That, okay? Engagement equals profit. For the rest of us, I guess you're aware of the Puppet Labs DevOps survey. One of their findings recently, 4,500 individuals, professional individuals surveyed, found that companies with highly engaged workers grew revenues 2.5 times as much as those with low engagement levels. Gallup, interesting findings on quality and what it was like to work in a highly engaged workforce. Lower absenteeism, that means less picking up drop balls, fewer safety incidents, which equates, and fewer quality defects. All these things come out of this mythical thing called employee engagement. And then for us, as people, because maybe we don't care about these kind of wishy-washy management things from the 70s, just let me ask you this. Who do you want to work with? This chap? Or this one? Does this move? Oh, look, this moves. Hang on a minute. Here I am talking about optimizing teams and making your own improvements. And now I can let people see this and I can press the button. Happy days. Now, if only my throat would kick in, that would be even better. So, wait, point on this. So look, engagement is the kind of thing that leadership worry about a lot. However, it's also a thing that you can affect in your own teams. No one wants to come to work and work with grumpy people all the time, right? We spend so long at work, it's ideal to be surrounded by happy, creative people who are getting things done. That's what makes us feel good. And generally, we are like them. So there's very personal reasons to think about this and not just rely on the people around you and the leadership to get it right for you and your context. So the Corporate Leadership Council, they were one of the first people to uncover this and really codify it. They said engagement is the extent to which employees commit to something or someone in their organization, and how hard they work and how long they stay as a result of that commitment. And I guess if you think about it, you can recognize times when you've been engaged or disengaged with something, be it a social group, be it an organization. And there's a couple of ways to think about it. One way to think about it is as an opposite. High engagement is the opposite of burnout. So when we burn out, we feel exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy, which I can't really say properly, but it means we feel inefficient. Versus high engagement, which is a feeling of energy, involvement, and that word again. Now, do you all kind of recognize the differences? Have you felt these? Okay, a few nods. Bit of disengagement, bit of engagement, that's all right. Another way to look at it is like this, which is to talk about discretionary effort. So discretionary effort is the effort that you optionally provide to your cause and to your organization. So the lower red line, the have to do, that's like the minimal viable job. That is what you need to do to not get sacked. Which I'm sure no one in this room is doing. And then the gap is what you choose to do, discretionary effort. And you can see this, for instance, if the systems go down of an afternoon, what does everyone do? Are there people running to help? They're probably highly engaged. Are there people straight in the pub going to get drunk? They're probably not that engaged. Are people running for home because they know that they've actually got connectivity and power over there? That's the difference between engagement. And so there's kind of tiers of this, and the people right down in the red state are called actively disengaged. And you'll probably recognize these, particularly if you're involved in change and agile, any kind of transformation. The resistors, the saboteurs, the people that are actually putting their energy into stopping other groups moving forward. And then the really engaged people right at the top of the purple line, that's where we'd all like to be, I think. That's where we often see ourselves. And that's where actually organizations want to take us as well. They don't want us to stagnate. It's interesting that they both start at the same point in the graph. If you look at the kind of zero line, when we join an organization, of course we don't know what to do really, and we don't know if we're engaged or not. So if we talk about, crikey, I need to move on. If we talk about what engagement isn't, one thing that really drives me mad is people telling me that they're doing a great job because they're using their research time for work. I don't know, I mean, the reason this is maddening is because it's designed to show leadership what a great contributor you are, but what they're trying to do is to get you to be more creative. You know, the reason Google and people like that have 20% time, I know it's dwindled since, but it's not actually about the outputs of that time. It's about building a culture of experimentation and learning. It's about creating a habit. And so if you are not investing your time in that creativity, you're not really engaging with the organization. So, quick quiz then. I know I've gone very quickly through this. Tell me who's most engaged. I'll have a show of hands afterwards. A, B, or C? Okay, A, most engaged, A. Most engaged, B. Most engaged, C. Okay. Well, the thing to consider is that happiness isn't actually engagement necessarily. Yeah, I'm pretty happy if I can escape my children, have a good cup of coffee and decent Wi-Fi. That works for me. So that doesn't mean I'm engaged. It doesn't mean I'm contributing to the organisation. Chances are actually A is the chap, because he is thinking about, he's thinking beyond just what he needs to do. He's looking at hacking work. How can I improve things? How can I make a difference? As we said. Now, Google decided to delve into this because they have teams like no other, really. They had a thing called Project Aristotle, and they investigated their team dynamics. It took them about 3 years. They used surveys, interviews, observations, and tried to understand what differentiated the high-performance teams. They had all sorts of confusing data. One thing that fascinated me is they found that the things that you would expect correlated with a high-performing team, particularly the things we learn from Agile, don't necessarily hold. Some high-performing teams had a really strong, quite commanding manager. Some of them were made of a bunch of individuals who got together, they did their work during their core hours and didn't talk afterwards, separated. You know, others were down the pub all the time. Others were, well, I should say, they were socialising. They were far more social groups. You know, others were really collaborative and didn't really draw on a leader for direction. And so they dug into it and they drew some conclusions. I'm going to whistle through these to get to the last one. But these are the things they thought were most important. And as these come up, just have a think if they matter to you in terms of driving your engagement. Dependability. Can we count on each other to do high quality work on time? You don't want the mental load of thinking, is that really going to come through? Am I going to have to chase that person? Structure and clarity. Do I have clear goals? Meaning of work. This is the purpose piece from Autonomy, Mastery and Purpose from Dan Pink. The impact. Do we fundamentally believe that the work we're doing matters? And this is what a lot of IT people struggle with, right? Because often you're driving corporate profits rather than helping feed the world, for example. And the one that was really interesting that they said they didn't expect was psychological safety. And this is what Project Aristotle highlighted as the key finding and the common factor across all of their high-performing teams, psychological safety. And what that means is a team environment where people feel happy taking risks. It's an environment where people feel like they can give their best without being criticised, without being humiliated, without being discriminated against. And it's, if you're trying to imagine what this is like, we did some show of hands a minute ago. I'm pretty sure a few people didn't put their hands up for anything, even though in theory 100% of the population here should have. And that's a feeling of not being safe in the environment. Think about your first time at work or first time you went to a social situation where you didn't know anyone. You don't feel too comfortable with it. Imagine then that you have that in your team, you're quite likely to withhold contribution, not bring the best of your talents. So this feeling of psychological safety is the thing that really drives team performance. It's kind of unfortunate because if the people at Google actually had a search engine, they would have found that Maslow knew about psychological safety in 1943. But, you know, the reinvention thing's good, right? Because it brings it back to the fore and people get to hear about these good things again. All right. So we're in the final furlong now. I've been quite theoretical, which I'm not entirely fond of. What I like to do is to give some things that you could work on tomorrow, ideally. These are things that I hope will help engagement in your teams and for yourself. And then in turn, that should make your attempts to improve performance or get towards continuous delivery better. And if not, you'll just be smiling more. Actually, quick tangent. There's a great way to just be happier. And you could try this right now if you want. If you grab a pen or a pencil, and put it in your mouth this way, you will automatically find everything that I say funnier. Okay? This works, believe me. You try it when you're watching an American sitcom. The reason it works is that your mouth makes the shape of a smile. And so your brain thinks, this is funny, and I am smiling. So no one feels sufficient psychological safety to try it, but that's fine. So things you could do tomorrow. So in terms of engagement, in terms of us feeling good about our teamwork and wanting to go out there and do a good job, just say thanks to someone. It costs nothing, but we do it so infrequently. And give praise. Ask for feedback, but then listen. And this is a really important thing to do. If you are in a team and you're trying to improve your capability, or you're trying to improve as an individual, you need those pointers. The thing that you think is the most important thing to develop, like an intimate knowledge of JVM garbage collection and mark and sweep, might not be what your peers really want you to develop. They might want you to develop the ability to show up to the stand-up on time, for example. So ask for feedback and listen. Follow your work. So this is like a mini bit of value mapping, value stream mapping. Once you think your job is done, follow it to the next team and the next team, all the way to production. It'll be easy if you're already doing CD, because it'll just pop out there. But have a look at what the effect of it is, and follow it, go around. And so that means that you'll, like the sociometric diagram that we saw, you'll be exploring the network, getting to know people and hearing about what's going on. And it means that B, you'll get a better understanding of how your kit is used, and therefore you can probably improve its quality. Ask, how's it going? But actually listen again. Proper listening is a real gift, and it makes the people who are listening, being listened to, feel really good. But the interesting thing is, when you say, how's it going? Generally, if you're in the right environment, you'll hear about the thing that matters to a person. And so if that happens to be an issue with your own work or your team's work or with the environment, or they've had too many interactions that day and they just want to be left alone, you'll hear about it. Simple question, amazingly powerful. Celebrate the right kind of successes. This is an easy thing that you can do in team, or you can cajole your team leaders to do this, but it wouldn't necessarily be about something like, yes, we cleared off 10,000 of those pesky bugs this morning. It would be more about, yes, we got to the root cause of all of those bugs. And that's what we want to celebrate. So celebrating the right behaviors. And you can do this with words, with things. It's just something you can take control of. Offer to help another team. That's a nice, easy one. And then the one I always get in trouble for, so important for CD, ignore your job title. Think about how you want to use your talents, what you can do with them to contribute to the organisation. You joined as a thing. You joined with a job title. Chances are, after 2 months, that's completely irrelevant, and you have other things to bring. Okay, so let's head into the conclusions now. So as we said, I think that continuous delivery teams are different to ordinary teams, or at least the factors for designing a continuous delivery team, or a team that wants to improve its continuous capabilities, delivery capabilities, are different. This strong desire to co-evolve, not just develop our own team, develop other teams and understand what the most important challenge for the organisation is. Understand the business imperative. That's what enables us to know what to evolve towards. That's what enables us to know what our fitness criteria are. That's like knowing we're heading towards the sun and not the dark. And then the autonomy to do something about it. And that means that we need to know a lot of things that aren't necessarily part of our normal roles. And to manage this high level of interactions, which can be hard. So I've deliberately used this word manage, because it's not just about only employing really gregarious people and somehow being tough enough to deal with loads and loads of interactions. It's about managing them, knowing when we can accept them, knowing when we need to go and think, knowing when we need to lock the team away, take them out of the open plan space and go somewhere where we can concentrate. Coevolution applies on a number of things, and I often think about continuous delivery capabilities as being a bit like this perpetual motion machine. Now, obviously, as much as we want to believe, perpetual motion machines don't work. They run out of energy, it's laws of thermodynamics, and what we need to do is occasionally give them a push. We need to just keep them moving again. And so, if you imagine that one of these balls represented team design and structure, so that one falls forward, but now the machine stops. Which one do we need to think about next? These things are co-evolving, so when you sort team design and structure, it's likely to show up the next issue, which could be any one of these things, right? Architecture, technical approach, learning methods, process, physical environment, the culture, and even the consumers. The consumers can be like a massive great rock right at the bottom, stopping the progress of the whole wheel. Because if they're not changing their mindsets, your organization won't be able to deliver in the way it wants. So we've seen that high engagement correlates with high performance. Loads of people are saying that. It's not to imply that Jez Humble and his people are data geeks, obviously. Engagement levels impact the bottom line, hiring, retention, safety at work, satisfaction, quality, and your well-being, how much you like your time with your team. Psychological safety is the secret sauce. That's the thing that really drives engagement and well-being and maximizes our contribution to a team. And there's a lot that we can do to try and recognize that and ask when we want that space made and try and help to make that space for other people as well. And it's the thing that helps us balance the pressure of interaction. So Simon Sinek, start with why, he says this: when people are financially invested, they want a return. But when they're emotionally invested, they want to contribute. And that's what matters. There's only really one way to finish this, with a misclick on this. Engage. So, that's all I have. Thank you very much.